So many of my colleagues, they're so interested in this stuff. They're terrified of it. Broadly speaking, as medical providers, it's practically a huge no-no, which is really disheartening because a lot of our patients have such profound experiences. Do you feel that there's a sense of that changing?
If a practitioner recommends and a client goes and has an experience, maybe a bad experience, that can then go back to the medical licensing board and say, hey, this practitioner recommended this. There is a legal pathway. The federal Supreme Court has deemed legal, which is a spiritual path.
It seems like once you try this stuff, you don't ever really come back quite the same.
What psychedelics can do is give us a new vantage point. They can zoom us out to the 10,000 foot view. They can help us see patterns in our life that are no longer working for us. And then you're right, we come back and we'll say, oh crap, the medicine showed me that I shouldn't do this anymore.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. This is Nico Misleh, your host, and this is the Nico Misleh Podcast. I'm switching it up today. I've got a really interesting guest on. A lot of times on this podcast, we talk business stuff and just hormone replacement therapy and, kind of medicine in general. And I think this stuff really falls under that category of medicine in probably more ways than we could imagine. GV was introduced to me by a really dear friend and colleague of mine, Andy, and he spoke so highly of him. Andy knew that I had a real interest in mental health and psychedelics in general. As a nurse practitioner, I probably have somewhat controversial ideas or opinions on mental health at large, which maybe we could even get into. But, God, probably now almost 10 years ago, kind of stumbled into the world of psychedelics as a medicine and kind of have been just following it very intensely. And so it was really exciting for me to finally get to talk to a living and breathing expert on this stuff. Cause most of the stuff I've been reading, are from Albert Hoffman and these scientists of old and Timothy Leary and all that. So this is great. GV, if you would, please give people a sense and scope of your background. Where do you come from and what the heck are you up to these days?
Well, I'll try and make it really simple, but I come from a little town in the middle of central Nebraska. I grew up in a town of 750 people. And to think that I am doing, I was surrounded by cornfields and cows, definitely. And to find myself doing this kind of work today is very strange, not ever what I expected. There's a saying in this work that if it's your calling, it will keep calling. Mm-hmm. And when the medicine started calling, I just started to listen.
I love that.
But I grew up in mostly small town, rural Nebraska. When I was a sophomore in high school, I experienced some pretty significant trauma that caused me to move overseas. I became a foreign exchange student to somewhat escape that. And for about the next 10 to 15 years, I escaped my trauma, at least numbed my trauma with a lot of substances. Mm-hmm. And I got sober in 2007. I found therapy in 2012. Therapy and yoga. Actually, yoga led me into the path of medicine work. And in 2015, I found myself in Peru, sitting with ayahuasca for the first time. And that opened up a whole new path of healing for me. So today, I study in a much more spiritual path of psychedelics. That is not the only path, and I absolutely honor the clinical path, the Robin Carhart Harris and Roland Griffiths and all these people that are sticking folks in fMRI machines and looking at their brains.
Yeah.
It absolutely has value. And I believe that there's this clinical path, there's a therapeutic path, which focuses more on the mind and how we think. And then the spiritual path really encompasses the physical body, the psychological body, and the spiritual body. So today my path is that. I study with a maestro in Peru, and I'm the founder of the Church of Universal Consciousness, and we choose to practice our spiritual and religious beliefs through the use of entheogenic substances.
Amazing. Thank you for that. That's awesome. So many questions. First and foremost, I'm going to ask a probably very basic question. What are psychedelics?
I believe that psychedelics are, in the clinical path, a molecule in the spiritual path a spirit. We call them the doctors, Dr. Mushroom, Dr. Ayahuasca, Dr. Wachuma, Dr. Tobacco, but they take us inside. Psyche, the Greek word for psyche, is soul. And these substances take us inside and give us an opportunity to see ourselves in new and more profound ways. I like to think of substances from either an escapist perspective or a confrontational perspective. Escapist, like alcohol, uppers, cocaine, methamphetamine, or even like fentanyl, the opioids, they help us escape our lived experience. And psychedelics, when used in a healing fashion, are confrontational. They help us to confront what's inside of us and eventually release that. So they're always healing.
Tell me, there's so many different types of psychedelics. You've mentioned a handful of them. And many of them, again, kind of hitting similar therapeutic modalities, so to speak, and then others kind of creating this ultra, intradimensional world. So for an example, maybe, I think a lot of us are at least familiar with the idea of magic mushrooms or psilocybin. And then when we get to something like DMT, for example, it goes from this like, oh, this is like a very approachable thing to something that sounds terrifying. And we have like ego dissolution and all that sorts of stuff. Can you like give my audience just a sense of that scope? Like, we from tiny amounts of micrograms or milligrams all the way up to these giant doses where we're, meeting God and seeing the universe created over and over again. Like where do people fall with that? How do you know what's the right amount to give or the right amount to take? Like, can you walk us just if nobody knows anything about this stuff, like where do we begin? How do we approach this stuff practically?
Yeah. So first of all, I appreciate the question and the desire to start at this foundational level, because pre-show we were sort of talking about this idea of set and setting. So Timothy Leary, 1961, in front of the American Psychological Association, says set and setting are the most important variables in psychedelic work, which I think that they're two very important ones, but it's a lot more complicated than just set and setting. And the two variables that you're talking about are substance, so which molecule or medicine you're choosing to use, and the second one is dosage, because the combination of those two are very, very important. So if we start with substance, I talk about, I think, 9 different substances in the book. And not everybody will agree with this, but I like to look at them on a scale of relative power. So DMT has a much higher relative power than, in some cases, MDMA or clinically in ketamine. So I would say the lowest on the relative power scale is ketamine. And think of that as like sandpaper for the psyche. On the other hand, we have ibogaine, which is the wrecking ball of psychedelics. There is also a function of durability here. So the higher the relative power, the greater the durability. Sometimes opioid addicts go have one single ibogaine experience and their entire opioid addiction disappears. On the other hand, ketamine sometimes has a durability of like 30 to 90 days for most people. That's why folks in ketamine situations are coming back. This is where like addiction potentially happens. This is where some of the Matthew Perry tragedy that came up, last year, a few months ago happened. So we start at ketamine on the low end of the scale. Up from there, I would look at MDMA, beautiful healing for PTSD. From there, then I look at psilocybin, which is the chemical compound in magic mushrooms. From there, we go a little bit higher to LSD. From there, we go up to mescaline, which is the compound, and almost all of these have been synthesized. All of them have been synthesized, but mescaline comes in San Pedro or the peyote cactus. So the Native Americans have been using peyote. The South Americans use San Pedro or Wachuma. From there, you get into DMT. So you mentioned DMT earlier. So DMT is the active ingredient in ayahuasca. Now we're starting, DMT is also referred to as the God molecule. So when people have these really profound experiences, oftentimes that's coming from either ayahuasca or 5-MeO-DMT. So 5-MeO-DMT is insufflated or smoked. So ayahuasca, then we move up to 5-MeO-DMT, an even bigger, more powerful God dissolving ego dissolution experience. And then that last one is iboga or ibogaine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you look at all of those substances across the continuum. And as a seeker, I recommend people starting with the lower, if you don't have any experience, to start with lower on the relative power scale. So having a ketamine experience, having an MDMA experience, and then maybe moving up to small to medium-sized doses of mushrooms.
Mm-hmm.
Now you intersect that with dosing. And I think of dosing as microdosing, very small, almost sub-perceptual amounts, to mini dosing, which might be in the mushroom world, might be a small dose like 1.5 grams or 50 micrograms of LSD. Then you get to a macro dose, which is going to be the 3 to 5 grams of mushrooms. And then mega dose, which there are people that are taking anywhere from 10 to 30 grams of mushrooms, which again, ego dissolving. And often the higher the dose, the greater. If you take a high dose of a really high relative power substance, the likelihood of ego dissolution, I don't like the term ego death. I like ego rest because the ego always comes back. Sometimes stronger than when it left. But you take a really high dose of a relatively high powered substance and the ego dissolution chance gets higher, and the fear and potential negative ramifications of the experience also get higher with it.
Okay, that makes sense.
Does that help?
Yeah, that's super helpful, which also makes sense. Is that why it's typically referred to like those slightly higher doses as hero doses? I've
so Terrence McKenna came up with a hero's dose. He said a hero's dose was 5 grams in a dark room in silence, 5 grams of mushrooms in a dark room in silence with eye shades.
Okay.
And I will tell you from my personal experience, the majority of people that come to me having had a really challenging, let's call it for purposes of discussion, a bad trip, they have looked at hero doses because in our culture, we like to be optimized. We like to get as much done as we can in the shortest amount of time.
Of course.
So, hey, if 3 grams is good, then 5 grams must be better. And you're right. Those hero dose experiences early on in somebody's psychedelic journey can cause just as much harm as they can help.
That's really helpful. GV, I know people probably have so many questions right now, especially if they're not in any way familiar with this space. I'll start with another maybe slightly more basic question just to kind of give people a feel of scope. So many of my colleagues in the, let's just say, medical provider world at large, they're so interested in this stuff. They're terrified of it, much like many of us are with things that just are unknown. But I think there's a lot of confusion because, there are federal regulations around these substances, the vast majority of them. Obviously, some states have kind of been a little bit more relaxed about this, but broadly speaking, as medical providers, it's practically a huge no-no.
Yes.
Don't touch it. You can't use it. You can't recommend it. You can't do anything with it, which is really disheartening because a lot of our patients have, kind of done some maybe healing work on their own or maybe with someone like you, and they've just had such profound experiences. Do you feel that there's a sense of that changing? And another question I would have that might intersect this is that a bad thing? Because we've seen a lot of times where we find a substance that's really interesting and potent and powerful. And then for some reason, whether it's like industry capture or, these big pharmaceutical companies kind of take it and then just almost find a way to practically destroy it and turn it into something that's like nothing like what it had been intended. Like, where do you sit on these things? Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Like, where do you see this going from a quote unquote medical perspective?
Yeah. So I think that if we zoom out and look at the federal level, the only legal substance that I just mentioned is ketamine.
Mm-hmm.
There are a number of trials that are happening right now with a number of different substances. Compass Pathways just finished up their phase 3 clinical trial, I believe. We know that Lykos/MAPS finished up their phase 3 last October. They took it to the FDA and it failed for who knows why exactly, but a number of reasons.
And just that was for MDMA, right? The MAPS
Correct.
one?
That was for MDMA. Okay. That's who. So MAPS/Lykos, they put on the Psychedelic Science Conference that just happened in Denver. Rick Doblin has been trying to get MDMA reclassified for 30 plus years because of its healing potential. Last week or the week before, I can't quote exactly what was said, but RFK intimated that he was going to try and get psychedelics legalized within the next 12 months. So who knows?
Who knows?
He has had some pretty profound experiences. And I think his family members have also done some healing with psychedelics. So I do think, and the veteran community, while some people are struggling with using the veterans as the poster children for healing, they are in desperate need. I do work with the Grunt Style Foundation. Heroic Hearts Project is also a huge organization that's trying to help veterans. And we are losing veterans at a rate of 17 more per day for suicide. So we need better tools. Now, from a practitioner perspective, you're right. Unless you're in Colorado or Oregon, Colorado just legalized, Oregon's been up and running for a year or two now. I think that as a practitioner in the medical community, it's risky to make recommendations. Because if a practitioner recommends and a client goes and has an experience, maybe a bad experience, that can then go back to the medical licensing board and say, hey, this practitioner recommended this. So in some ways, it's why I wrote the book, because I wanted to give practitioners the ability to say, here, go read this, learn everything that you can. It's a really practical handbook to help people make some informed decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But to answer your question, yeah, I think that we are getting closer. And I will also say this, there is a pathway, a legal pathway that the Supreme Court has deemed, the federal Supreme Court has deemed legal, which is a spiritual path. So churches are forming in the United States. The UDV, the Santo Daime are two. There's been the Condor and the Eagle Church has been recently approved by the DEA to hold ayahuasca ceremonies, to hold that medicine. And another church very recently in Washington, I can't remember the name, they have also just received approval from the DEA. It is a sincere religious practice to serve this medicine and to commune with the divine.
Mm-hmm.
Federal Supreme Court has deemed this legal. So if there is one potentially legal path, it's to find a church who is acting in good faith, serving this in a spiritual way. It's not the default way for a medical practitioner or a clinician, but it has been deemed a legal way to practice these, to use these medicines for healing.
That's very interesting. Do you feel that, well, I guess I'm so interested in your opinion on this or thoughts behind this. So, from a medical provider, you mentioned the clinical pathway. Obviously much of medicine has been so reductionistic, right?
Yeah.
And we understand why and maybe the history behind that at large. But, from my standpoint, and again, this is kind of how I operate my clinic, is quite on the holistic side of things. I'm like, hey, we don't have to narrow in on this one substance or thing. We can actually expand upon this and look at the body as, a variety of systems working together and then even extrapolating out beyond that. Where does the stuff that Roland Griffiths and all those guys have done is amazing. I mean, it's incredible just from a purely scientific endeavor. And I just never thought in my lifetime I'd see something like that going on. But at the same time, I I feel this from you, and I hear this from so many of the other practitioners who are into the psychedelic world. It's the sense of like, once you experience the stuff, you don't quite have the same. And I think this is, I'm sorry, I'm rambling here. I think this is also part of the fear that maybe a lot of people have, is it seems like once you try this stuff, you don't ever really come back quite the same. You look at things differently, you respond to things differently, and maybe that's for better or for worse. Like, is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's the whole point.
Okay. Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
And you're absolutely right that so humans, humans do not do well with uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of our dis-ease, so much of our malcontent is because we have sort of fallen off the path of what I would consider dharma, our true purpose.
Mm-hmm.
We act out of conditioning, we act out of trauma, we act out of learned behavior from our teachers or from our parents, or like however we learned to function and keep ourselves safe in this world. And no matter how hard we try and no matter how successful we can be in that path, if it's not in alignment with our true soul, our true self, no matter how successful we are, we're unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
So what psychedelics can do is help give us a new vantage point. They can zoom us out to the 10,000-foot view. They can help us see patterns in our life that are no longer working for us. And then you're right, we come back and we'll say, oh, crap. The medicine showed me that I shouldn't do this anymore, that I shouldn't be in this job anymore, that I shouldn't be connected to this partner anymore, that I shouldn't smoke cigarettes anymore, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But when we have that new awareness, it's our responsibility to start taking action. And what tends to happen is that when we begin being a little selfish with our healing, the people, the structures, the organizations around us don't tend to enjoy that very much.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we disrupt our life, we're disrupting the lives of everybody around us. We teach people how to treat us. And then when we learn a new way to treat ourselves, we have to expect and hope that other people treat us in a different way as well. So disruption is the name of the game.
Yeah, that's really well said. Something you mentioned, which is really interesting. I think especially in America, and I'll speak broadly for the rest of the world, we have all kinds of different religions out there. Broadly speaking, again, Americans generally viewed as a Christian nation. Where does that intersect for patients? And I'm sure you've worked with people who are probably devout Christians or Catholics or things of that. I'm picking on one religion specifically, but I think there's a lot of fear that all of a sudden this is going to destroy their relationship with their religion. And again, maybe you feel one way or another about that, but like, what has your experience been on that front? Because I'd also imagine there might be people who actually come out and feel closer to that spiritual side of things. Maybe they're just, I just kind of kneel and pray and practice this kind of, outwardly, but inwardly, I don't really feel it. Like, I'm just so curious, what has your experience been like working with all kinds of different people on that front?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the people that struggle the most with psychedelics are atheists.
Why? Why is that?
Because atheism has a built-in cognitive model that there is no higher power, so therefore I'm responsible for everything.
Yeah.
And if I'm responsible for everything, then I've got to make it all work. I've got to do it all to get what I want. There's nothing out there. There's no higher power. There's no God. There's no whatever source, universe, whatever you choose to call it. Nothing's got my back. Nothing's looking out for me. And what psychedelics have a really good tendency to do is to show you that you are a minuscule thing in this grand system, this grand cosmology, and that there is a divine source, there is a higher power, there is a universe. And the drastic shift in cosmology that can occur in a single psychedelic session can cause so much cognitive dissonance inside of somebody's psyche that it can really cause some disruption and dysregulation.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that the biggest challenges that I see people have are people who don't believe and then all of a sudden do believe, and they don't know how to integrate that. For everybody else, I would say the medicine in my tradition and my belief, these substances are emissaries of the divine.
Mm.
And they are all working for God. So I think that the Christian God is the same thing as the Muslim God is the same thing as the Hindu God. It's all one God.
Mm-hmm.
And we all just have different ways of getting there.
Mm-hmm.
And the medicines respect our belief system, and they can give us signs and signals and messages that match our belief system, that show us how to connect with that divine presence in the way that we need. So I've never, not once, seen a Christian become a Hindu or a Hindu become a Jew.
Yeah. Interesting. Right.
Everybody comes in with their belief system. The medicine honors that and shows us exactly what we need to see to heal.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting because in so many ways that seems kind of telling. Even from like a hypothesis scientific model, you'd be like, well, that's really interesting because like, wouldn't you expect these things to, if they are breaking your brain apart or something like that, that somehow it's going to create this different signal for you. And again, I think that's really interesting because we even see that with ketamine and a lot, like as a general anesthetic, putting someone to sleep. The whole idea behind that is very akin to, some of the stories that I've heard from patients who have taken very large doses of psychedelics, which is this sense of like, if I give you medicine and put your body to sleep, I basically am telling your cells, do not interact with each other at all. And so all of a sudden, if you really are just a clump of cells, if that's maybe sort of like this atheistic, very hyper reductionist perspective, I'm just a speck on a floating rock and everything's meaningless. How come you always come back as you? Like, how is it, where do you go? And, like literally it doesn't make any sense. Like I've turned you off as a person, as a being, and then I turn you back on as a nurse anesthetist or anesthesiologist every single day. They do this every single day. And magically you come back as yourself. But what's even freakier is that we've seen with ketamine, and I know you probably know this, like you can have some really, you can have times where you don't really quite come back all the way. And it's very scary and daunting. From your perspective, what is all of that? Like, where is that coming from? So I think from this point of view, for me, it's like there's something totally unexplained here. And this is where I think a lot of people, maybe might bash religions or spirituality in general, or that there is a God. But to me, that's probably one of the most obvious signs that there probably is. It's just so obvious that to me, it's like almost hiding in plain sight. But what is your perspective on beings in general? Like where does spirituality come from? Why do we have this sense that we're not alone?
Yeah, there's it's going to be really hard for me to give you a clinical answer to this question. How do I want to get into this? So I'm gonna take first of all, I want to just maybe share a couple delineations between religion and spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
So my religion is about a leader, mm-hmm. and that leader tells you to do something and act in a certain way. And if you do everything right, you'll get your prize when you cross the finish line.
Mm-hmm.
That finish line in most religions is death.
Mm.
So if you try really hard every day, at some point in time when you die, then you get the prize inside.
Yeah.
Spirituality is the total opposite. So there is no leader of spirituality. Spirituality happens everywhere. It's not just in a specific place like a church. You are the leader of your spiritual life. In my opinion, and that of Advaita Vedanta, which is the underlying spiritual philosophy of Hinduism, mm-hmm. We say that spirituality is just self-knowledge. And psychedelics help us know ourselves. And if you believe that there is a God and I am God and God is in us, if God is in me and I become more self-aware, I am becoming aware of God. And so that's a little bit of spirituality. So I really want to separate those two, that the psychedelics are not religious tools. They are spiritual tools. They help us to become aware of the self. Now, what you're really talking about is consciousness. Every night, there's actually three stages or three types of consciousness. We have the waking consciousness that we are operating in right now. We have the dream state, which when I dream at night and can remember those dreams, I am in I'm in the dream state. We're in the waking state today. And then there is a third state of consciousness, which really I become unaware of everything. Deep sleep. When I enter into deep sleep, I do not remember anything anymore. Now, why is that? Because there is no one to remember. Right now, we are in a subject-object relationship. I am the subject. I see you on the screen as the object. Two consciousnesses looking at each other. When we move into deep sleep state, our consciousness disappears and we merge with divine consciousness. We merge with universal consciousness. So there is no more subject-object relationship. My consciousness merges with everything, and therefore there is no subject to remember anything anymore. So when I come back out of that deep sleep state, I merge back into waking consciousness and everything comes back online. But here's the crazy part. When I am in the dream state and a bear is chasing me in the dream state, and all of a sudden I wake up and I say, whoo, thank God it was a dream. I invalidate my entire dream state in an instant. I say that none of that was real. But what can happen is that we can wake up from the waking state. Waking up from the waking state, we now enter into a completely new reality where we look back on this waking state of you and I and say, it was all fake. It was all just a big dream.
Yeah. So does that describe in some ways the idea of, you kind of mentioned it in terms of like universal consciousness. I've heard some people discuss panpsychism, if that means anything to you, but this idea that, consciousness is practically speaking all that there is. And it's simply like an interface almost is what we're experiencing in our lives, like a video game almost in some way. And again, this is where maybe like, is this like virtual reality or is it, what is this exactly? But the sense of like, I don't know, the mug that I'm holding right now is blue, but like we can't actually we can't find blue. Like we can't discover why is it blue. Like we don't have any real sense of that, other than the fact that like maybe consciousness is just the apparatus or like the divine that's kind of reaching in and, I guess providing us with this interface experience. Is that am I on in any way, shape or form a track?
And consciousness is all pervasive.
Yeah.
So God is in everything and everything is in fact, I would say that it's more true to say that everything is in God.
Yeah.
And again, Advaita Vedanta, Hinduism would call it the Brahman. The Brahman is the substratum of everything. It is. So I'll give you for the scientists out there, we talk about the Big Bang and before the Big Bang, there was nothing.
Yeah.
And then the Big Bang happens and then there's a whole bunch of things. That is physically impossible. We cannot get something from nothing. So how does that happen? How did all of this come to be? The way that we perceive it in the spiritual world, at least one version of it, is that the Brahman or universal consciousness has always been and will always be. It was never created and it will never go away.
Mm-hmm.
But it changes form. It changes from an unmanifest form to a manifest form. So at the moment of the Big Bang, all of the material that we experience in our life today was already present in an unmanifest fashion. And with a single click of the universe's fingers, it went from unmanifest to manifest.
Mm-hmm.
And it is that consciousness that creates the blue mug that you have in your hand, and it creates the voices and all of the books on your shelf. So it is the same consciousness. And what's they're talking about in string theory, it is all just energy tightly bound together
Mm-hmm.
that eventually begins to create subatomic particles, and those subatomic particles begin to create matter.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at everything as energy, every thought in our mind is energy, every cell in our body is energy. It's all the same energy. And it is, I hate to say it quite like this, but we are all one.
Mm-hmm.
We've just forgotten. And it is the grand illusion.
Yeah.
And healing is remembering.
Mm-hmm.
Remembering that we are all one. It is remembering our true divine nature.
Mm-hmm. And that speaks to like what at least appears to me to be a very obvious theme with patients that I've spoken to who are psychedelic practitioners or enthusiasts. Practically speaking, they get a sense that they're one with the universe, which is like something I commonly hear from my patients. And it's funny because some of these patients are people that like, I don't think I would have ever heard them say, I think they're like disappointed that it's coming out of their mouth. Like in a funny way. All of a sudden they're like, I'm in my backyard and my trees are like, I think I can communicate with them. I think they're communicating with me. They don't look the same or feel the same. I think they're staring at me. It's just so profound. In fact, I had an experience, my first experience ever, because I trialed some mushrooms, psilocybin, and I started with a very small microdose, and totally sub-perceptual, nothing, and I kind of slowly worked my way up. And one day I took a dose that I thought would still be a microdose. And it turned out it was very much not a microdose. And GV, I was actually, it was kind of a quote unquote off day for me. I'm at my office, so it's closed, but I'm there and I'm working. And I was actually eating my lunch, and as I normally do, which I hate, I'm staring at my phone while I'm eating lunch. And all of a sudden I start seeing some of the characters and stuff swirling a little bit and the colors getting kind of funny. And I'd never experienced that before. So, and I actually kind of forgot that I had even, trialed these mushrooms earlier that, just an hour or whatever ago. So I'm having this kind of like visceral reaction to the phone. And I tried to do, and this is where, again, I always feel like when I talk to my psychedelic patients, I'm like, God, that sounds so crazy. And now when I'm saying this, I feel that way. But I felt this presence. That's the best way I could put it, is a presence. And this, it wasn't a voice, but it was this sense of like someone that really loved me saying, Nico, I don't know why you're always on that phone. It makes you so miserable. You just stare at it for the colors and light, basically. There's nothing going on in there but colors and light. And there's all this. I'm like hearing or feeling this sense of like someone that loves me having this conversation, almost as if they were like holding my shoulder and I freaking threw my phone like across the room. I was so spooked by the whole thing. And it didn't last much longer than that. I kind of just sat back in my chair and just kind of closed my eyes. And actually after that, just had this really nice, warm sensation and experience. And for weeks afterwards, I couldn't look at my phone the same way. Like it was such a profound change in such a short time frame. What it felt like, I don't know. I don't know how long it actually lasted. I wasn't really keeping track of time, but it wasn't like this 12-hour experience. It felt like maybe, an hour or two tops. And it was just unbelievably profound. And all I could think of was, my gosh, if that could happen to me just over this phone, like this has to be so unbelievable when it comes to I mean, well, it is a super strong addiction. I frankly think it's just as addicting as pretty much anything else out there. But just the sense of like this went beyond medicine, I guess is the best way I could put it. Right? It was that I had a transformational experience, not that it just completely like, hey, for 10 seconds you're going to forget about your phone, and then the minute this wears off, you're just going to go right back and hop back on. I guess what I'm saying is I think where I'm nervous about the clinical side of things getting into it is I'm afraid that they don't see that the transformation or the spiritual experience is kind of the purpose, or it's like I feel like that journey has to happen. Am I right in saying that? Because I feel like, I hear about this microdosing. I'm like, well, just microdose, and then you don't feel anything and you'll be fine. I'm like, I don't think that's the point. I just don't know if that's right. And I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Hit on like 3 really, really important points there that I just want to maybe click on
For sure.
each one of them briefly. So the first one to your last point is, this is the difference. So the clinical way looks at these as a molecule. Mm-hmm. The spiritual, or I might even just look broadly say the animistic perspective, looks at them as a medicine or as a spirit. And I think that the clinical side, like they're taking this psychedelic compounds and they're removing all of the psychedelic effects from them. And they're just looking at neurogenesis.
Right.
And that is taking this deeply spiritual practice and a deeply spiritual experience that you had and making it completely reductionistic and turning it into just something else that can be monetized, productized into a drop. Mm-hmm. And that's the way the Western world and late stage capitalism works. Yeah. And I don't think that we can stop it.
Yeah.
So
right.
It's okay. It's not my preferred way, but that's one big difference. So animistic or medicine versus molecule, one big difference that you just talked about. Another big difference is you just pointed to the deep and profound power of small doses. Mm-hmm. It sounds like you have maybe like mini dose, maybe
I
grams.
Seriously think it was, if I remember correctly, it was no more than a gram and a half.
Yeah.
Well, because I remember thinking this is going to do nothing for me. Like I haven't felt any of this beforehand. I'll just go about my day. Yeah.
The absolute beauty and power that people can have on a small mini dose of mushrooms with consciousness and quiet and like intention can be absolutely life-changing. So when we go back to this idea that I need to take a hero's dose of 5 grams or more to have some healing experience, that's not it at all. And the last piece here is, I'll ask you, what was the person that put their hand on your shoulder and was talking to you? Where did it come from?
I have no idea. In my opinion, I would call that person God. Literally, yeah. Like there's no better explanation for it. And the closest thing would be like, like the feeling of like when you were a little kid and you got hurt or something bad happened and your mom gives you a hug. Kind of that like overwhelmingly like I'm so safe and so present in this moment kind of feeling. I mean, again, it sounds so bonkers when I say it sometimes, but that was the feeling I had. And like, I didn't want to disappoint this person anymore. And they didn't want me disappointing myself. And it just felt like this beautiful relationship almost unfolding out of nowhere. And it was so profound that even today, so this was probably almost 2 years ago now, even today, if I'm quiet enough and still enough, I can like enter that some amount of that moment. And I never looked at my phone the same way as I did back then. It was just her. It was like, it was just, it was such a profound experience. It really was.
So Stanislav Grof coined the term inner healing intelligence. Mm-hmm. And then that got brought into the MAPS trials and facilitator curriculum, that we honor the inner healing intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has their own inner healing intelligence. And in some people's perspectives, that was one of the reasons why the MAPS trial got kicked out of the FDA, because there was some level of cultish spirituality that we were trying to build into a very structured, medicalized process.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some pushback among that. But I would tell you that in my perspective, that is your soul. There's a
Mm-hmm.
deep inner part of you that says, I love you,
Mm-hmm.
and this is what's good for you. So don't look at your phone in this way anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And if we go back to this idea of the Brahman, which is the substratum of everything, when your soul got incarnated for the first time, you inherited a little tiny piece of the Brahman.
Mm-hmm.
A little tiny piece of that God came inside of you, and that is your soul.
Mm-hmm.
That is the inner healing intelligence. And the medicine thins the veil between your conscious mind and this spiritual body.
Yeah.
And that's really when we talk about ego dissolution, we talk about piercing the veil or peeling back the veil of consciousness and peeking behind what's there.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be what your soul was wanting you to do.
Yeah. I mean, and piercing the veil is interesting. I think that's a pretty good way to describe how it felt, which was like, oh my gosh, like, what is this? What am I doing? This is so crazy. Like, why do I have this in my hand? This is just literally like lights and music just coming out of this freaking metal block. Like, what am I doing with this right now? Like, what is my intention behind this? Just all those very like introspective thoughts, but it was nice. It wasn't introspective in the way that it typically is, which is like self-deprecating and like, no, Nico, you're so dumb. Why are you on this phone, you idiot? It was like, yeah, that sense of like love and meaning and purpose behind why I was feeling that way or thinking about this. That's
the difference between healing at the within the psychological body. So the psychological body often comes up with that self-deprecating,
Mm-hmm.
You're doing it wrong, you're broken, something's not right. The spiritual body, there is none of that.
Mm-hmm.
I tell my clients all the time, we are both 100% human and 100% divine
Mm-hmm.
at the same time. It is the master paradox of all of this. So the brokenness, the way that we have been trained to think, is oftentimes that we're not healed, but our soul is perfectly healed all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So when we get to listen to that deeper inner wisdom, it will never tell you you're doing it wrong. It will always tell you that you're perfect and you're healed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, well said. I'm curious, what has been obviously you've been doing this for a while now. What has been obvious to you in the sense of like, if patients or clients do well with, however you call them, how do people respond to psychedelic? Like, is there a type of person or personality or whatever that you notice has a tendency? You mentioned atheists being one of the few people that have struggle with like, what does this mean after I'm done with this? Are there people who they take this stuff time and time again and they're just super resistant to it? Like, it's like they can't see, they're like, what is going on? Like, who are those individuals? What is their deal? Why can't they seem to access this?
Yeah. It's also a really great question. And I came from 25 years in corporate America. My degree is in computer information systems, highly logical,
Mm-hmm.
also having had experience with trauma and neglect as a child. So I grew up to be very controlling, very self-sufficient, very unwilling always looking for the escape hatch.
Yeah.
So I find the people that have very like the creative people, the musicians, the poets, like the folks who just kind of walk through life gently and easily, oftentimes their psyche metabolizes psychedelics so much easier. The medicine comes in and they have these beautiful experiences of like God moments and divine presence. And then there are people like me. There are people who struggle letting go of control. So I would tell you that if you look at the Big Five personality test, high degrees of neuroses are one way to tell if psychedelics may be a challenge for you. The higher the level of neuroses, and the lower level of openness. So those two vertices on the Big Five personality scale can indicate that you may struggle with classic psychedelics. Now, ketamine is a good way to break through that, because especially in an IV drip versus an intramuscular injection where it like blasts you off immediately.
Right.
An IV of ketamine will slowly move you into the path of dissolution, of separating with consciousness. MDMA also hits the amygdala. The amygdala is where all of our fight, flight, freeze, fold responses come from. That's where that control mechanism is oftentimes held. MDMA targets the amygdala, calms that down. So MDMA is a great medicine for people that have a lot of control in their system. When you move into the classic psychedelics, psilocybin, LSD, mescaline, DMT, control and a lot of trauma can be really challenging for people to do medium to high doses of those classic psychedelics, which is what I have often found. So I tend to work with a lot of MDMA plus psilocybin. So the MDMA relaxes our trauma response, our control mechanism, and then the spiritual nature of the psilocybin can come in behind and work with it. So yeah, I would say if you have a high degree of control, which I think a lot of your listeners are probably entrepreneurs, they are visionaries, they are people that are working hard to accomplish something. They have grown up into building their practice. They are paid to make decisions and be in control. Be careful how quickly you move into the relatively higher power, DMT, mescaline, LSD, and the size of dosage.
Well said. And I will speak as one of those people who is probably extraordinarily neurotic, pretty open, but very neurotic. I was like, I can't imagine taking 5 grams where 1 gram gave me this. And it was uncomfortable. It was beautiful, but it was uncomfortable, and in a good way, of course, right? Like I learned a lot. But yeah, it's very clear that, hey, this stuff is so, it's no joke.
That 1 gram gave you an opportunity. It's like sipping consciousness through a coffee straw. So imagine it like this tiny little straw that you got to sip a little consciousness through. Now go up to 5 grams of mushrooms, go up to 300 micrograms of LSD, ayahuasca, ibogaine. Now you are drinking consciousness through a fire hose.
Yeah.
And some people cannot, because of their control mechanism, they cannot metabolize consciousness that quickly. And then it causes post-psychedelic difficulties. It causes ontological shock, where your whole worldview of yourself and the world around you has been shattered, and you have lost all of the scaffolding of consciousness that you thought was true before, and now it's all gone. And this is where harm can occur in the psychedelic space.
And GV, I'm curious, and I know I probably need to let you go here soon, but so many of my patients have encountered even just one-time events of psychosis, broadly speaking, where, again, could it have been a little touch of schizophrenia or bipolar or whatever? There's a part of me that thinks those people are, again, this probably sounds interesting to you, but probably sounds hokey to many of my medical provider friends. It almost seems like, are they accessing consciousness in a way or shape or form that is terrifying? Because we see, practically speaking, the same, at least patients that I've encountered who, relatively speaking, they're perfectly normal. Then they go to some party and they try something that they shouldn't have tried in a really bad setting, and they're never the same person after that. And which is, I think, where a lot of the fear comes from. Oh my gosh, it's going to like break your persona in half. And is it that kind of same idea in terms of like Timothy Leary, like this, even just the setting of your own personal life can push you into opening or accessing consciousness in a way that's detrimental and somehow.
there was a Indian saint named Meher Baba, and Meher Baba used to create ashrams for people that we in the West, we would have deemed schizophrenic. He said, you're not schizophrenic. You are just operating on another plane of consciousness. So these people would show up in the ashram and sometimes for years would act like somebody with very deep mental health challenges, but he would care for them in the ashram. And then at some point in time, they would come back down. He called them God intoxicants. And we treat that in the West as a mental health disorder. They have a very different perspective in some places in the East. And psychedelics can open us up to energies, can experiences, planes of reality that we are unfamiliar with, which can feel like psychosis. Absolutely. And if we're talking about like the big ones tend to be bipolar 1, especially rapid cycling, BPD, and schizophrenia. Those dramatic shifts in consciousness can be hard to ground. So when clients come to me with those 3 specific conditions, if they are not stable today, I do not recommend adding a psychedelic to the mix because it's just they are going to disrupt the system even more. Now, I do have people who have been diagnosed bipolar 1, who have been on meds for many years and are relatively, let's just call them stable in their life, but the meds are not working anymore. Something has shifted where they're now starting to experience the swings again. Held with the right intention and with the right medicine and the right medicine carriers, I do believe that those people can heal. I believe that the mental health crisis that we are in today is only heavy energy, heavy memories, ego, vanity, old training in the system, sometimes from this life or past lives. And when we clean that, which is all psychedelics are doing, they're just cleaning low vibration memories. When we clean it up, people can heal. And it can also get worse before it gets better.
No,
just like therapy.
Yeah, that's so well said. I resonate with that quite a bit. Again, even in my sense of mental health, it's like this reductionistic stuff that we've come up with is practically silly. Even in the scientific literature, when we're looking at this reductionistic stuff, we're like, this doesn't even hold water. The serotonin hypothesis is like basically useless, which means probably the dopamine hypothesis is totally useless, which means what the hell is schizophrenia and bipolar and all this stuff anyways then? And it seems, again, again, if you're very, very scientific or you kind of have that atheistic perspective, it just seems like, wow, we'll figure it out someday. But I don't know. I look back even historically and think we were doing pretty well in some parts of the world with those types of individuals suffering from those issues. And so, I think there were spiritual aspects around it, which was like, understanding that this is more than just, a mental health problem, that this is probably much broader than that.
This is the Bible according to GV, but I oftentimes think that the mental health crisis that we are in today is a result of impatience. Impatience for raising our kids in an emotionally stable home, but also impatience of the people that we would diagnose with severe mental health disorders, like that we now need to hospitalize. We just don't have the patience to treat them as humans. So we move them to a place where we don't have to deal with them and we can't see them. And it's easier to just give them a diagnosis and say, take these medicines so you don't feel anything. Right. Because if you felt everything, there would be no good place for you.
That's really well said. Yeah, I love that. In fact, it speaks to even the broader message, which is, and this isn't just like my opinion, this is like clearly in the research. If you give someone who has, like, there's a very significant amount of people who have one psychosis event in their lifetime and then never again, practically speaking. That is not uncommon. If you happen to give that patient a antipsychotic medication, they're like 2 to 3 times more likely to continue having psychotic events. Wow. Whereas if you don't give that to them, they're likely to only have that one ever in their entire life. And so again, it makes sense that the ashrams, I think even the Quakers here in the United States for a short period of time were like, the safe haven for mental health patients, right? And clearly they were onto something there. And then right as, 1920s, 30s, psychedelics are kind of like, this is really interesting. All of a sudden, poof, it's like magically gone. And now all of a sudden we have antipsychotics hitting the market, and we know the rest of the story.
There's the appendix in the book is a reprint from an article from a couple of doctors that show a very high correlation between the prescription of antidepressants and suicidality in the veteran community. So the numbers are really hard to argue with. That the more antidepressants that we're prescribing, the higher the incidence of suicidality is, at least in that population, because it was all the data was there. And I think that that's where Grunt Style and like a beautiful friend of mine, Will Wisner, is now petitioning the VA and all of these veteran support organizations to stop overprescribing of antidepressants, because it's actually causing more harm than it is good.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, this speaks to, I'm deeply involved in hormone replacement therapy, and I started using that really for mental health.
Wow.
And I think there are, again, I think there are molecules that are, I think all molecules are probably divine in some sense, right? I don't think any of them are like totally evil and dangerous, but I think that there are molecules that are so beautiful and so well purposefully designed that they enhance the person. They enhance the quality of their life. We see net positive results because of them. And I think psychedelics are on that same vein. I think it's very obvious. And I think there are molecules that are clearly not doing that. I mean, if SSRIs work so well, then why is our mental health exponentially worse than it was before they were even around? So, I think that's so interesting, GV. GV, if you could give people a sense of, if they want to contact you, work with you, because you have so many amazing things going on. And I know we didn't really even get to talk about some of those things. Your book is incredible. I've told so many of my providers, like, look, because they're frustrated, like, well, I can't use any of this stuff. I'm like, that's not the purpose. Educate yourself, because at some point this is just going to happen. And you want to be prepared for that. You want to be able to, quarterback this for your patients, or at least have a sense of, who do I send them to? So anyways, I'm commending you for the book, because that's a pain in the ass to write. I know how hard that is. Well done. Please tell people how they can find you, how they could work with you, et cetera.
Yeah. So I would say the easiest way, if you're just looking to get in contact and have questions, it's gvfreeman.com, just the letter G, the letter V, freeman.com. If you're looking for psychedelic information, I have really tried to make as much content free as I can. So the website to go for free psychedelic information is psychedelic.iq.com. And there's a psychedelic starter kit there. There's a synopsis of the book. It's a free ebook that people can read online or download. Psychedelic.iq.substack.com has a ton of psychedelic information as well. And that is, as far as I truly believe that this is, psychedelics are an experiential healing tool. Spirituality is an experiential healing tool. It's not about knowing it in our mind. It's about feeling it in our body. And if experiences are what you're looking for, there are a couple of experiences that actually we're going to Peru. If anybody's looking for indigenous work, we're going to Peru in November. But outside of that, there are other opportunities within the religious structure and framework that we have with the church. And sometimes that's one-on-one work. Sometimes that's group work. So they can reach out to me. Either one of those websites are fine.
Amazing. GV, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Seriously.
Yeah. Thank you.